How about we go to York? Rod, give us an overview.
Right, so this one is lot 18 in the Acuitus auction. It's 32 Coney Street in York, and it's let to the perfume shop, which is quite a big outfit. I think they had about a £10 million profit in 2019. I imagine their 2020 will be fairly terrible. Because they are based around high footfall areas, airports, that sort of thing. So I imagine they would have had a tough time, although they're a decent sized business, and hopefully that will just be a one-off. It's a pretty good-looking building on the high street in York. I don't know if you've been to York, but the roads are very kind of historic. They're very thin. No sort of cars on there. You've got the river to the back of it. It's a pretty building.
Which building is it? Is it the one?
It's the building there which is it's kind of boarded up with the light blue, and then it's basically got what looks from the front as 4 stories. So it's got the ground first, second, ground first, second, third, and fourth stories. But the third and fourth, there's one very small window at the front, and then nothing in the fourth. So, and also on the tenancy schedule, it hasn't been measured, the third and fourth, and it's been used as ancillary. So again, similar to the business rates, they probably couldn't get in there over COVID because it's been tough. So again, you'd expect it to be similar to the size on the second floor, but again, something you need to kind of have a look at. It's a tall, skinny building, but again, there's opportunity above that. Now, York is great for tourism, and it's got quite decent values for not just house prices but everything. I mean, this building's being rented for I think 128 grand a year in total to the perfume shop. It'll be interesting to see how much of that they're using. Again, if you've been there to the area, when you go into shops, quite often they do utilise that first and second floor. They're quite quirky buildings, and I'd imagine they probably are using that. But like they said, the third and fourth, I'd be surprised if anything's happening up there. So there could be some opportunity for something to be going on up there, whether it's expanding on a shop, which is probably not the best way to go, judging on how things are going. But I mean, certainly things like serviced accommodation in the past have done really, really well in areas like York.
And this would be right for just I think it's a class M or class L M, I think.
Yeah, you just need to check on the actual building itself if there's any heritage. I think it's grade 2 listed.
Well, it's still like that's up to 2 flats above a retail shop. That applies on conservation areas and also on listed buildings.
Yeah.
You will need a listed building consent, but you can just go ahead and do the 2 flats under the class. I think it's class M.
Yeah, it's not the clearest kind of looking at the drawings there of what.
Can you click on lot number 25 in the same auction and see which adjoining building is for sale as well?
It's the one
to the right.
To the right, yeah.
Okay, that's nice. Okay, I like that.
So I mean, the reason I like this one, it's in a, like I said, in a really good area. When you look at the height, the third and fourth floors are not being utilised. They don't actually go up as high as the 2 neighbouring properties. It's just the facade that does. So there's room there. It's got a decent price per square foot of residential in the area. It's got a decent rent. We all know retail's struggling, but in certain areas like York, where you do get a lot of footfall, assuming a big assumption that things kind of get bit back more to normal, and York does start to get a lot of people coming to visit, then that's always good. Even on the first and second, you've got space for, depending on what's being used there at the moment, you've got space about 110 square meters. I think it's 60 and 55 or something like that square meters on each of those floors as well. And like I said, there's a big serviced accommodation demand in the area too. So I think there's a few different opportunities there, and you've got a decent business in the perfume shop. And you'd think that actually, if they're banking on high footfall areas continuing in some parts of the country, that's where they're going to want to stay. I haven't had a good look at the lease.
But it's ending in October, November. But they will have to serve a notice 6 months before, so that would be by end of April, May. They will have to serve a notice.
I think that's why it's being priced on a, I don't know, 38% yield or something.
Yeah.
Because you'd be expecting that they won't do that. But I'd be looking at what we can do with the ground floor, and which is kind of, I don't know, 100 square meters on a space. And if you can get that, and then you can get those uppers into service accommodation, I think that might be quite useful. As I said, there's a decent price per square foot in the area for those types of properties. So I think it's worth doing building works to that, assuming you can get through the listed issues. But again, that's something to think about, and it's the listed part will be a headache. But again, we've talked about what you can do at the back as well, regardless of that. So I just think it's an interesting one. I think York's a really great area. It's a high value area. Will always kind of be fairly primed there. So yeah, I liked it for that reasons.
Okay, brilliant. I think it might do well in the auction just based on the current range, and but I have to admit that buyers in Acuitus are way more there aren't very many crazy sales, and usually the guys at Acuitus, they're all risk surveyors, risk qualified people, and the way they draft the catalogues is amazing, and they usually get the prices more or less right for those properties. So
yeah, I think if you're looking at it, the other thing to look at is has the perfume shop been paying rent through COVID? Because they haven't got long left on it, and are you going to see any of that? Assuming they're going to leave. And then what do you then do? How much really is that building worth as retail at the moment to get a new lease in? I doubt it's going to be 128 grand for the whole building, but I will be looking at, right, what about if it's just the first 2 floors, if it's just the ground floor, and then looking at what you can do with the rest.
So with the perfume shop, it's is it the sweet smell of success, or is it an absolute stinker? Which one is it?
I think it's I think it's a bit of a brute. Like what's that? The really cheap kind of no nonsense deodorant that I think once you get them out, they'll be gone. Or again, it's negotiating. Do they need the whole building? And I think that's they'll obviously want to look at costs and cutting those down after this year. And so a bit similar to what's gone on with Holland and Barett in the previous lot we discussed, where they've exercised their right to leave and then renegotiated based on that. And I think this type of property is one where it would be worthwhile taking control of those uppers if you can.
And it looks extremely cheap for what it is. Like, I think it's a common theme so far of those buildings. This is number 2 and 3 Marketplace, Melton Mowbray, Leicestershire, lot number 11 in Allsop commercial auction. And it's a prominent town centre freehold shop investment, guided at 300 to 325. So we know the reserve price would be set between those values, and the gross initial yield is 7.5%, The entire building is let to Holland and Barett Retail Limited. And basically, what it is there's been a lease to Holland and Barrett at 70. Prior to this being the rent was so the lease to Holland Barrett was at £35,000 prior to renewal, and Holland Barrett, I read the legal pack or parts of the legal pack, and Holland Barrett basically exercised the break clause in their lease, and then they used that as leverage to get a new rent, and then they agreed a rent of £22,500 for the whole building. So that's what it is, and the upper parts are quite substantial. So this is from probably VOA website again, but in total the whole space including the basement, it's got about 6,000 square feet, and I don't think that's all being used by Holland Barrett. Basically they've got it in the lease, but I doubt they use the upper parts that much. So I think the reason why it's so attractive is because it's a town center location again, very prominent location. The building's got like windows from all sides. Actually, this side, it's on the corner. It's got lots of frontage, and I think you would be able to relet this downstairs part to like either 2 or 3 retailers or even smaller type retailers. And I would try to get access for upper parts and try to do some other commercial kind of use for upper parts, either serviced offices that we discussed before or some form of something commercially viable. But I think buying the property at such price, it just kind of makes sense.
How do you access the upper parts? Can you access it independently of the shop?
Well, from the pictures, it's not clear, but I don't think so at the moment. So at the moment, for the next 3 years of Holland Barrett being there, or 2.5 years now, I think you can't do anything. But afterwards, I think you could create some sort of entrance over here, like somewhere.
Well, there's definitely lots of locked-in value there because if they're only using the ground floor, maybe even the first floor for storage or for offices or whatever, there's still an additional 2 floors to play with there. So that's quite a lot of locked-in square footage that isn't being utilised or really valued. So that's an interesting building.
I am concerned. I don't know this area. Well, here's what concerns me: is the rent was 35k. And it's recently been renegotiated to 22.5. Now, and Holland and Barrett, like many big companies, have played this game at times that they have been able to in the lease. Now, if the upper parts were of any value, then the landlord would have said, okay, you can have a rent reduction, but we've got to take control of the upper parts. What happens in areas where the upper parts are probably too much hassle to take back is that the landlord pushes back and say, look, we'll give you a rent reduction, but you keep the whole building because we want you on the hook for the FRI. We don't want to take back the parts because then the landlord is responsible for the maintenance of those parts as well. So that concerns me because if the upper parts had value, that would have been part of that lease negotiation.
So I would disagree. Like there are spaces of, for example, Holloway Road, space around that, you know this area very well. So the space around Iceland is a gigantic space, unused, totally unused. The space around above Vodafone, about like quite a few of the retailers there, totally unused, and you couldn't call this an invaluable space. It's actually probably 700, 800 pounds a square foot type space, but it's all about creating access and going through the hassle and having the creativity to actually do it. And I think a lot of people are just like the easy rent that's coming from a good covenant, and that's what they care about. And I think a lot of sellers do not have the creativity, the willingness, and also the know-how. Like, not everyone watches those videos to basically have the ideas that we're sharing here and kind of try them and discuss them with other people. I think a lot of landlords are just lazy.
Yeah, it's just that it's nearly a third, isn't it, that's been swiped off the rent,
I
not
think
ask for
it's
it back.
probably halfway between the two. In that, yeah, taking a third off the rent shows that, look, in this small town, there is likely going to be an awful lot of boarded up shops and what have you. Having said that, where it is, I mean, this is the prime spot in the town for any retail. I mean, a cafe would be brilliant. You've got 3 different points of frontage on there. It is low value. So, I mean, the residential kind of price for flats in the area is about 1,800 quid per square metre. So, to Ranjan's point, repurposing those uppers into anything is going to be quite, I don't know whether it's going to be cost effective. And I absolutely get that point of not wanting to have to take liability for an old building in an area where, let's face it, if you've got to fix a building wherever you are in the country, there's going to be kind of a minimum price you're going to pay for that. I think to convert to residential, I just think it's going to be too much to do there. And I think you kind of were talking about offices and things like that up there. It just depends a bit about how much demand there is in an area that is quite low value.
Yeah.
For offices, and I'm not sure that
the problem with those sort of areas with the offices is that it is so much more cost effective to buy an office building because space is not at a premium and that. And then if you've got an office building, you know, you've got suspended floors, suspended ceilings, you can run cabling without a huge amount of trunking, you've got air conditioning that's easy to put in, you know, all of this sort of modern stuff that's just base minimum in an office building.
To Piotr's point, to Piotr's point about a lot of landlords just not knowing, I do think that's true as well, especially with commercial buildings where they would have bought them in their pensions, they would have bought them and they just want an easy life. They're not interested in kind of redoing things. They're not interested in getting creative. And it's a combination of not knowing, but also not having the appetite to get stuck into that because that's not what they've invested in that building for.
That is spot on.
Passive kind of.
I think that's a classic example, like also with our Park Avenue News. It's like those sellers could have done so much better with those buildings, but they sold it to us, and we tripled the value in 9 months. So I think a lot of landlords who just don't have appetite to do things is that. But yeah, it is a low value area. I think you just need to be very creative with the commercial use and the way you structure this. I wouldn't want to convert it into residential. You're probably right. It wouldn't be very appealing to live there. And I think this is asking for some kind of commercial use that's going to be profitable.